Friedrich is the one who inspires Jo to continue writing. Why did she lie to people? Then it goes on to her making comments on his character, the way he looks, and that he is quite old. Racist, fatphobic comments. It goes back to that old Laurie good-looking, Friedrich not-so-good-looking argument. She apparently thinks that Jo is rather pretty. She doesn't pay any attention to that Laurie is harassing Jo in the book.
Her comments make me go like, part me kettle. Friedrich is too old for Jo. What about your husband?
Yes, what about your child with your husband?
I was going to say, there is a pretty good age gap between her and Noah Baumbach. It is pretty close to Jo and Friedrich are because they are 16 and theirs is 13 years. How can you sit there and say that when your own husband is a good 10 years older? Like you said, she is very hypocritical and it sucks. It really sucks because I really liked Lady Bird. Personally, I thought it was a good movie and I was excited for this Little Women because I was like, oh, this director is good, and Saoirse Ronan, I have always liked her, and those two are not entirely romantic. Have you seen Lady Bird?
No, I did see Call Me By Your Name, and I thought he does good emotional roles, but I was really disappointed with Laurie because he didn't do anything, basically. He was just there standing being pretty.
In Lady Bird, at one point, their characters try to be a couple. Saoirse Ronan's character is clearly interested in him, and they kind of have a thing, but it comes across, and I think it is rightfully so, their characters come across being awkward together because he is very blowsy about everything. The reason why her character likes him is because he is sort of a cool outsider who doesn't really care about anything what she wants. I was like, okay, they have good screen chemistry together, so this is going to be good in terms of, I can see them having good screen chemistry as Jo and Laurie, but I was like, I don't like how they were trying to push it. It still felt very awkward trying to make something happen. There is that, I don't know what cartoon it is from, but like this character is trying to put two people together. And I feel like that is how Gerwig was, just like, Kiss. And it is not going to work. They're just not going to be that couple. They are great friends. I have seen interviews with them, and they are really adorable together as friends, but I don't know if I can see them as a romantic couple. They just don't have that feeling for me.
Now I feel kind of bad for them, and I don't really know that much about either. There's this whole chapter in Little Woman 2019 Film Guide where Gerwig talks about how she wanted to make fun of Jo's and Friedrich's relationship, and I read that and I was like, this person doesn't know anything about Louisa May Alcott. And when I have read Gerwig's interviews, she is like, oh, Louisa May Alcott hated marriage, Louisa May Alcott hated this and that, and I'm like, if you had read any Louisa May Alcott diaries, you would know that she had a fling with the real-life Laurie, and that she was in love with Henry David Thoreau. And to me, the whole thing about this split ending, either Jo ends up with this guy who in the movie she doesn't seem to be that interested, or she's independent and lonely for the rest of her life. The book publishing part fails because the book is based on Louisa May Alcott's real-life relationships with the real-life Laurie and the real-life Friedrich. If you erase those relationships, like Gerwig is trying to do, you don't have the book. You don't have the story. It disappears. This movie would not exist if Louisa May Alcott didn't have those real-life relationships.
Gerwig felt to me like she didn't do as much research. I think at one point I said Gerwig just read the clip notes on a query search. It felt like she was very dependent upon the myth, and the stories of her editor pushed her to marry Jo off, as I have learned from you. No, she didn't. No, the editor never did. Not for Jo, not for Meg, not for anybody. And to say no, she didn't want her to be married in whatever urban myths that are added into the world of Little Women. It felt very much like she was just going off with that rather than having actually read the book and done her own research.
It is more like fan fiction if you think about it.
That makes me think of someone. And Anon, who said 2019, Little Women is bad fan fiction discussed. I'm like, oh, absolutely. That weird thing I can never get out of my head because it just absolutely ruined me, where someone wrote a fan fiction where Teddy, Joe's and Friedrich's son, is actually Laurie's son. It has ruined me, and I hate to say that it had kind of ruined for me Joe naming Teddy after Laurie for me, because I just never can't get that fic out of my head. I know some people will say that is silly. It is just a fanfic, but so that is why my modern day story doesn't have Theodore at all. I just keep having these flashbacks of that fanfic, and it just ruined it for me. And it really felt like a bad dream, some bad version of a wonderful novel.
When I read her interviews, it was always a different story in a different interview. She kind of ruined her movie to me with these interviews because, I mean, she is a celebrity. A lot of people know her name. Millions of people read her interviews, and if they read her interviews where she says, oh, Joe marries this horrible German, and then she makes this race. Hello, friends. It is Niina from the Little Woman podcast. Just to let you all know that the Little Woman podcast episode transcripts are now available as books. You can find them as paperbacks and ebooks. They are wonderful reading for all the fans of Louisa May Alcott. You can find all the links from the description. And now, back to the show. Comments about him. And Greta Gerwig has the most German name in Hollywood, by the way. She has German ancestry. People are going to buy your narrative because they see you as an authority, and you just lie to people and even encourage xenophobia.
You are doing nothing to help to change the narrative of what Little Women is. Like, you are embedding sort of toxic myth of what the story is and ruining what Alcott felt. I feel like she is probably rolling in her grave with that adaptation, with the way people are getting her character wrong. And I hate to say this way because I am in no place to judge anyone who is trying to make a canon character to be LGBT type. But it bothers me when people headcanon a character as an LGBT when it is based on a misinformation. When people say, oh, Joe must be a transgender because she prefers to be a boy, but she is not saying that she prefers to be a boy because she feels in her heart that she is a boy. She wants to do boyish things because, again, time period when boys had more power, more control over things than girls did. Nobody is thinking of that. They're just thinking of what they see on the surface. I saw an article. I didn't read it. It wasn't working for me, but I saw someone putting on an article questioning, was Louisa May Alcott herself transgender, unless you have some serious evidence that she was, other than the fact that Joe, her character, who is her avatar, wanted to be a boy. That must be case enough to prove that she wanted to be a boy herself. I'm not buying it. Again, I feel like if you can back it up with something that is not just a stereotype of a LGBT, fine, because I personally have canon Joe as being a demisexual, demi-romantic, but I can at least back it up with what I think and having it be legit rather than to be just because I just want her to be, or because of this false conception that I have of a character and how I think Louisa May Alcott would have wanted her character to be. I have seen people get mad when I'm like, I don't agree with Joe being a lesbian. There's not evidence in that. There's more evidence of Amy being bisexual than Joe being gay. Seriously, I think at one point she is looking at her classmate. She says she is pretty.
To me, Joe being gay theory falls pretty much in the beginning because Joe doesn't really like women in the book. She doesn't like to hang out with girls. And with all the lesbians that I know, they usually naturally go to hang out with the girls.
I think that is one of the biggest key points of being a lesbian is being into girls.
Joy's very much into boys. First, she wants the freedom that the boys have. But then when she meets Friedrich, oh my gosh, one of my favorite scenes in the book, she literally moves the couch in the nursery so she can stare at him all day long. And then there are all these comments. Oh, I love that he's so masculine and he has these big hands and big feet and Laurie is so girly. Laurie is so feminine. Not to mention, if you read other Louisa May Alcott books, you see the Friedrich-like character always as the love interest because he's based on Henry David Thoreau and Louisa May Alcott was in love with him. Joe loves very manly, masculine man, and it is not just Little Woman. That same narrative exists in all of Louisa May Alcott novels. There's a lot of praise for smart, caring, masculine-looking man in her books. There are also moments in the book where Jo wants to be very feminine. She likes to knit. She likes to make dresses. She loves being a mom. And the 2019 film, it was all about money and queerbaiting. And I am not a fan of that. And I think now with Barbie movie, people are starting to see Greta Gerwig as the way she truly is, someone who tries to make money with clickbait feminism. It is not authentic.
Novels, and I had not read the script, the early drafts of it, or any of the interviews before, and I already did not like the movie once I saw it, but now sharing those interviews and sharing those quotes and all that, it makes me not only hate the movie more, like from genuinely cannot tolerate it to absolutely hating it. At this point, almost I would be worried if she would have her hands on another adaptation that I would like, or even an adaptation that other people would like, because I don't want anybody else to go through that misery as well, because just like I know a lot of fans of Game of Thrones had that very disappointing ending, and we at the Star Wars community were like, we are so sorry, and then we got our disappointing ending, and all the Game of Thrones fans were like, we totally understand. That is what I feel like if Gerwig ever got her hands on an adaptation of a beloved novel, or it is a beloved novel to somebody else and she just ruins it, I would feel bad for that person, because nobody should have their favorite novel get ruined. I feel so bad for the fans of Persuasion. I need to read the book. Someone gave me a collection of 4 stories of Jane Austen, and I see people just rip the new Persuasion off because it is so bad, and I am like, I feel so bad for you. I understand how you feel. I got my own dose of a bad adaptation and of a beloved classic. It is becoming a weird trend lately, doing stuff like that.
It is weird because postmodernism is based on this idea that nothing is real, and Greta Gerwig's films are described to be postmodern. But if you want to make a period drama that is based on a book, which is based on someone's life, I don't think that should be postmodern. She's trying to sell herself as this feminist person, but then you have Jo, who in the movie suddenly wants back a character who in the book abuses her. Where is the feminism in that? You make these complaining comments about character being German, and you don't like his accent, and you pretty much feel racism among your fans. Jo in the book loves that Friedrich is German, and Louisa May Alcott was a Germanophile. You say that you love the writer, and yet you make a mockery of the things that were important to the writer. Where is the feminism in that? All these comments about how this movie is made by woman for woman, there are all these previous Little Woman adaptations that were made by woman for woman, and then you just steal stuff from there that you just want to fit into your version. Somebody said that Christian Bale's hairstyle is similar to Timothée Chalamet's.
That version, it was really tried to play it to the masses, because here is the thing. I feel like if you are going to be a filmmaker or a writer, whatever, you are going to have to be decisive and stick to your guns no matter what people are going to think. But it felt like Gerwig knew that people were going to be mad if Jo is going to end up with Friedrich. And if she ends up with Laurie, people are going to be mad at that. But then you have Jo and Laurie together. You have people who ship either Laurie and Amy or Friedrich and Jo together getting mad. So she tried to make something that was middle ground to make everybody happy, but she just made it worse.
Can we talk about Emma Watson in this film? Because I have a problem with her. I don't like the live-action Beauty and the Beast, and I have heard people saying that Emma Watson should have played Jo because she's Belle and Belle is like Jo. Linda Woolverton, who wrote the 1991 Beauty and the Beast, the animated version, which is one of my all-time favorite movies, she was inspired by Katharine Hepburn's Jo in the 1933 Little Woman. So there is a connection between Belle and Jo, But then in the live-action version, I didn't feel any kind of chemistry between the Beauty and the Beast, but also because of the queer baiting. They were promoting the film. We now have the first Disney LGBT character in LeFou. LeFou is actually one of the most horrible presentations of an LGBT character. He is a mockery of a gay character. It is a stereotype of the way especially straight men see a gay character. And when I was watching the movie, I remember thinking to myself that is a very offensive way to portray a gay character, and I was quite disgusted that the movie was promoted with that. And Emma Watson has this brand that she's this clever feminist. She's Belle and she's Hermione, and people were disappointed that she played Meg. Meg is a great character in the book, incredibly overlooked by many, sadly. This is where the 1994 film gets Meg right, and the 2019 film erases her entire growth. Greta Gerwig was like, oh, when Meg goes to Vanity Fair, she should get a day off for being this struggling person. She needs to enjoy herself. I think this was in the 2019 film guide. Gerwig was like, Meg settles for a poor man. It felt like Gerwig wanted Meg to marry a rich man, and sometimes I feel the same when she speaks about Jo and Friedrich, that Jo should have stayed with Laurie because Laurie was rich, and that doesn't make any sense because the film was made in 2019, not in the 1950s. Jo can combine career, family, and love, and Amy does as well, so they don't need to make this choice. You need to be either an independent spinster or be married, and not to have a career, which is such an old-fashioned way to think about Little Woman, because in Little Woman the woman combined the two, but in the movie, when Meg goes to Vanity Fair, she doesn't have that growth. In the book, she is in the company of girls who treat her like a doll. They are not her friends. Gerwig says that we are just supposed to see her having fun or having a day off from her, quote, miserable life. But in the book, it is the Vanity Fair that makes her miserable. She is not treated well by these girls. They make her feel like she's lesser than them. In the book, Meg doesn't feel like her life is terrible. Even though the family is poor, the family is still pretty happy and pretty content. It is such an amazing scene in the 1994 film when you can see that Meg feels very uncomfortable in that place when the girls are dressing her up and trying to make her presentable. And then she has that discussion about the silk and how her father took a black child to their school and they had to close the school because of that. They don't buy silk because they are against child labor. You see how Meg is a strong character, but all of that was entirely erased from Gerwig's film. This is interesting because the film guide talked about the scene, Meg's meltdown scene, with the silk, how she and John had a big argument, and then I heard later on that it was not in the final film because of Emma Watson's acting skills, and in general, James Norton had to carry her throughout most of her scenes.
I felt that the film really pushed Meg and Beth aside in order trying to make room for Jo and Amy. This film really is the Jo show, but they put Jo and Amy in such a contrast between each other that it felt she was constantly trying to pit Jo and Amy against each other. I felt like Gerwig was trying to put some sort of commentary on it, and then she was like, oh, Meg and Beth are just air. They're kind of push on the story to push Jo and Amy's stories along. It didn't feel very genuine, and I felt like we really did lose a lot with them as much as the actresses did try, and I liked Eliza Scanlon to play Beth. I have seen her in another movie, and I like her a lot. I think she did her best with Beth, but I hate to say, I didn't feel too much when she passed. It is one thing to be clever with your parlors or your visual quests. In the 1994, we see Jo wearing red dresses, and we see Beth wearing that later, and we see Meg wearing a blue dress, and later on we see Amy wearing it, but I sort of knew it was going to come because you had already set up the same scene when Beth is out. Jo wakes up and she goes to the kitchen and sees Marmee with Beth, and the second time wakes up alone and goes to the kitchen and sees Marmee alone. 2019, it didn't have the same impact. there could have been, and again, I think it is such a shame because one, we don't dive into either one of those sisters' emotional storylines exactly compared to Joe and Amy, and that is supposed to be one of the most heart-wrenching moments in the book, and we lose that. It felt like Gerwig had, in a way, favorites, but then also torturing those favorites. You just want them to suffer because, I don't know, that is what makes great art. I do feel like their characters were pushed aside. Somebody said that the guy that plays John, James Norton, he is a British actor. He has been in quite a few things. He was in the most recent War and Peace with Lily James. I have seen a lot of people and his fans who were very excited to go to see the movie, and then he was barely in it, and when he was there wasn't much that he said.
I agree. I think he's a great actor, but it is like with Laurie or with Fredrik. Gerwig doesn't do anything with the male characters. They are tossed aside. You are supposed to see these couples working on equal grounds with one another.
They did not feel very equal partnerships in the way they are supposed to. I think, again, about the 1994 version, there was an interview in one of these special features documentary commentary when someone said that they did not want it to be just the story of the March sisters, but everybody, and it should be everybody. Gabriel Byrne said, when I was growing up, my mother and my grandmother read us Little Women. I grew up loving it so much, so it is not just a girl's book when you only focus so much on the sisters and you don't give any of the male characters their true story arcs. You are ruining it. There are quite a few great male characters in the story. Chris Cooper is a great actor, but I barely saw his and Beth's relationship. I feel like Gerwig tried to torture who she feels are her favorite characters. She tortures Joe, who she says is her favorite character, to the one who she says she identifies with, but then makes Amy a hero. It has a feeling that she is not a big fan of Amy. I am so bewildered by her thought process. That is why this movie is dead last on our list.
One of my friends said that when Beth died, she didn't feel anything in the movie because it did not show the close relationship that Joe had with Beth. When I watched the movie, I thought that Beth's death was only used as a vehicle for Joe to write the novel. Then in reality, we know that Louisa May Alcott's sister, Lizzie, died when she was in her 20s. It was not in any way start of Joe's writing career. Her sister's death in the book changed Joe to become a better person because Beth's death leads to Joe having an identity crisis. She begins to revalue her own life after her sister passes away. That was entirely missing in this adaptation. I think it is a perfect scene in the 1994 film when Beth dies and she and Joe have that last chat together. Winona Ryder's Joe goes to the window and watches this dark, gloomy autumn landscape. Branches are hitting the window and she is looking at the shadows in the night. Then she goes back to bed and she's dead. Joe's whole life has changed. It is an amazing scene in the 1994 film, but there's nothing like that in the 2019 film. 49 and 2018 films did Beth's death also pretty well. One of my friends said quite recently, you know that scene when Fredrik comes to court Joe in the 2019 film? Joe came downstairs and shuffled bread into her mouth, and my friend said, Joe is supposed to be about 28 now. She has a guest. She lives in her parents' house. 2019 Joe doesn't do any work there. She just hangs out. She's kinda rude. She doesn't thank her mother. She behaves like she's a 15-year-old. I remember this article that I read about Louisa May Alcott. It was based on one of her letters that she wrote to her fans. And the fan was like, I was so sad that Joe didn't end up with Laurie and that Joe had to grow up. And Louisa May Alcott answered her. She wrote, why to think that Joe is 15 or stays as a child when she is 30 in the end of the novel? Why people think that she's beautiful when she's written to be tall and lanky? That pretty much sums it up.
Absolutely. I hope that one day we will get another adaptation that will wash out the bad taste in our mouth. I will wait for that one.
That was the last ranking chat between I. For now, Thank you everyone for listening. Christina, take care and make good choices. Bye.